Hey, Michael.
Hi there. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. Am I the first one on?
No, there are a few people in.
Okay, good. Thanks for doing this. Hi, Steve.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, good. 2 Zooms in 2 days.
Yeah, it's
That's nothing.
that was good last night, wasn't it?
Mhm.
Hey, Ray. All right. We'll wait.
James, do we need to mute?
Yeah, I think I can mute all of you. I will mute all of you. Well, I'll just ask you guys to.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Bill. Mhm.
Good evening, everyone.
Hey, Chris.
Oh, there I go.
You should be able to right now, Ray.
Yeah, now I can.
Not on, are you on screen?
Yeah.
But I will ask everyone to stay muted throughout the presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time, hopefully, if I don't talk too much and too long, for everyone
No,
to.
we're not worrying about
You should be.
that.
James, I have to get off at 8 o'clock for another meeting.
Okay, great, Bill. Well, there should be some time before that for for you to participate in the discussion. So I will call on you first.
Okay.
All right, let's see what we got here. Got a few people. Excellent. Just hoping that everyone is able to enter the room without being admitted. Looks like that's the case, which is good. All right. Okay, so in a moment or two, I'm going to share the screen and begin the presentation. And this is how we'll proceed. I haven't timed it out, but I don't imagine it will take more than 20 minutes to a half hour. All right, and then once I'm done with my presentation, I will encourage all of you to participate. Maybe what you can do is, as the presentation is going on, just jot down any questions, and then once I'm finished all the way through it, I can go back to any slide that you might have a question about, okay, or a comment about that you want to elaborate on further. It's just to, I say this every time I do one of these, whether it's a walking tour or presentation at the Apple Tree House, whatever, that many of you know more about these things than I do. So I would really welcome everyone to chime in with pertinent information regarding any slide or any topic that I've covered that you can add more to. That would be great. Consider it a collaborative effort in that way. Okay. With that said, make sure sound is on. We'll get going. I have a nice little overture beginning here, so go with that. Everyone can check to make sure they can hear. Imagine Journal Square before there was any transportation. A long time ago. You could see perhaps some trails here. Maybe the original native people who came through Journal Square might have used. Maybe that's sort of how it looked. Right where maybe the Lowe's Theater is today. Okay. After that, let's get into it. All right. If anything defines the character of Journal Square, if any one thing can be identified that does, it is, of course, the PATH station. And this is, so therefore I put a picture of a recent photograph of the trains coming in from the west through the old Pennsylvania Railroad cut, which actually was done by the New Jersey Railroad way back in the middle of the 19th century, and coming into PATH Plaza. Transportation defines a city, defines a neighborhood, and in many respects, clearly today, it's the PATH that does that. But also automobiles, certainly, from the 20th century on, have come to define. I think we have a little audio here. For better or worse, audio transportation today also defines Journal Square. So anyway, here's our presentation for this evening. I'm going to provide an overview, and maybe focusing a little bit more on some things that selfishly I was interested in exploring a little bit more than usual. So there are going to be some gaps, of course, but we'll do the best we can, and hopefully you guys, when all is said and done, will fill in some of the gaps. So as I said, maybe 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have a good discussion period. All right. Trails, tracks, and traffic. We can start the discussion off with just asking the general question, why are indeed cities, urban spaces where they are? And there are many reasons for that, and many of them involve transportation. Rivers, of course, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the central role of rivers in the growth of cities. That will give you a little bit of human history on that point. Trails and trail junctions is another place where cities have grown. All right. Elevation. Cities often perhaps were built in places where there was an advantage because of elevation. Canals, as canals were built at the end of the 18th century and beginning of the 19th century, it spawned urban development as well. Then further into the 19th century, of course, railroad junctions. Today, when you look at a map and you ask, well, why is that city where it is? Most of the old cities, yeah, they're on rivers, right? When you get to other places, though, indeed, some cities are on canals. Classic example, if anybody's from Chicago, you know that, okay, Chicago's on a lake, but it's connected, or it was first connected to the central part of the United States and the East and everything else by a canal. Today, we call that canal the Chicago River, but it's a canal. It was dug. It was not there beforehand. So some cities grew up around canals. Maybe canals played a role in Jersey City's history as well. Railroad junctions. Why is Atlanta where it is? Okay. Railroads. And there are other cities that fall into that category too. Highway junctions coming into the 20th century. And why is Phoenix where it is? or Houston, etc. Some of these cities, their especially their latter-day urban sprawl is due to their position on a highway. Some urban centers died because the interstate was built around them, right? And other little miniature cities grow up around interstate highway junctions. So highway junctions fostering urban growth. And then we might ask, hey, looking forward, will there be something like digital junctions and cyber cities? Something to think about. And maybe there are other places that are reasons for why cities are where they are. I'd be open to coming back to that and discussing that too later. Okay. So back to rivers. Here's the classic map of ancient civilizations. And as you probably know, this is review for most, but yes, the first cities were born on rivers. We have Memphis over here on the Nile River Delta in Egypt, northern Africa. Of course, Babylon and Ur, home of Abraham. These were predated, of course, by Sumer and Akkad, but all in Mesopotamia, right, in a river valley. The Indus River Valley over here in the old Mohenjo-Daro, which we don't know too much about, but we know it was an ancient civilization. And then, of course, ancient Chinese civilization was born along riverbanks and in a river valley between the Yellow and Yangtze. People settled by rivers for food and water, of course, and then first to capture it and then to start farming it. And then they built their cities, but also rivers provided transportation. We know, for example, from archaeological digs that indeed there was contact between the ancient people of Mesopotamia who traveled by water over to the Indus River Valley, etc. So water transportation was how human civilization grew. All right. So now I'm going to share with you, actually, this is the fun part. These are some ancient, or these are some present day, sort of present day cities, famously on rivers. They may not be so easily identifiable. If anyone can identify one of these, please do so in the chat room. Don't shout it out, just write it in the chat, and maybe we'll think of some prize for the winners. So number one, anyone know this river? Classic European city on a river.
Then,
I don't have a keyboard.
left bank, right bank.
Hey, mute yourself, please. Award goes to Ray Schwartz. Prague on the Danube. He nailed it. Well done. All right, number two. Close, Chris. Isn't it the other city in Tennessee? Well, I'll give, yeah, I think it is Memphis. Yes, yes. Yeah, Knoxville's up in the mountains. All right, so yeah, old cities that grew up on rivers. Okay, Prague. Oh boy. Another ancient Eastern city. Varanasi. Could be. I don't. I have to go back. Yes, yes, it's Delhi. That's the Ganges River. Excellent. All right, good. So cities grew on rivers. That it was river transportation, and we've seen in these various pictures a variety of whether it's an old river barge being pushed by a tugboat, or these boats here. Yeah, it just made sense. Okay. Oh, I've got one more here. Jersey City. No, no. I have to go back and look at my notes. I have it. If I exit the slide, it's there, but we'll come back to that. That'll be our mystery one. All right, let's move on. Speaking of Jersey City, now here's a river we know, and Twin Cities. Twin Cities framing this river. And of course, no orientation needed here, but clearly we know from extended history that New Amsterdam was founded here because of the waterway. It's actually interesting that New Amsterdam favored the river location initially more than this more well-characterized harbor location, and set up their capital called Orange up the Hudson River, or North River as they called it, in present-day Albany at the conjunction of the North River and the Mohawk. But certainly because of the water, this city grew up here. These cities, these twin cities, one of which we know well, but we know them both well, but one of them that is dear to us. In any event, but when we talk about Journal Square, of course, we're not talking about transportation that is directly river-based, right? Okay, we've got a good correction there. I'll come back to those later, but because we got to move on. But in any event, Journal Square transportation would not be what it is if Jersey City were not located on a river. However, as we know, it's not. We're not talking about water transportation tonight. Geography and the role of geography. This is critical. What you have here is a aerial shot of the Palisades in New Jersey. And this, of course, is north of where we are. And people often talk about the Palisades and think they mean, oh, the exposed cliffs. But of course, the Palisades refer to this high ground that runs along the west bank of the Hudson, all the way down through Jersey City, finally coming to rest in what would be South Jersey City today. But in any event, this elevation, of course, characterized or led to Jersey City. Let's just locate it somewhere down here. But we know for another lecture on Bergen Square that why the Dutch decided to colonize up here because of the high ground and the safety and whatnot, security that it afforded. But also because, again, to the connections of the river, this led to some really interesting historical developments in Jersey City in terms of connecting the transportation system to the river. Okay, and the result is a whole network of tunnels and things carved out through these Palisades. Before that, canals, all right, to get down to the water. I also, of course, want to begin to mention the Lenni Lenape, the native people, who, by the way, came down to the water to harvest their food during the summer months and keep it up, fish, oysters, etc. And they camped up on the high ground, right? But it was on the way to the river, and that's an interesting way to talk about transportation in Journal Square. It's a place that's it's not a terminus, right? It's a stop along the way to the river. Kind of characterized it that way. So and so it was for the Lenni Lenape, who were the first to transit through Journal Square. Here they are, maybe. This is from Lenni Lenape themselves, a painting they posted. You can see them harvesting in the water, and maybe on the right side of this picture, this would be them camping in the summertime in an area that would be like Journal Square today. Okay. This is an interesting photograph I have in my records. It must be a reenactment of some kind, but you see them these are authentic Lenni Lenape canoes they used. By the way, they used other waterways to get down to the Hudson River as well, Hackensack, et cetera, Passaic rivers, and then often walked over the high ground. All right, here's the famous 1841 map of Bergen, and I put this up here for a couple reasons to point out that this map has a lot in it that relates to transportation. But one thing we all know is that some of the present day streets that certainly do not follow a grid pattern. We've got Tonelli coming here. We've got Summit, even Bergen itself, away from the square. And this is Newark Avenue, like that. These were all the old Indian trails. Okay, today they're streets, but these streets, which became routes for streetcars, buses, and of course automobiles, were initially Indian trails. So there's a connection between the Lenape and present day transportation. Of course, you see the big railroad cut here. This would be usually referred to as the Pennsylvania Railroad cut, although they took it over, I think, from the New Jersey Railroad. More on that later. Anyway, so these transportation features are in this famous 1841 rendering of colonial Bergen. Next slide, please. Aha, colonial transportation. There it is. I'm sure we'd all like something like this today, but we don't have them anymore. But this is one way in which people got around in colonial Journal Square. Yeah, I love this painting because besides the fun cart, the faces and hands are like something out of the Middle Ages. Seems like a misplaced painting for art history buffs. Anyway, the human representation is old. This would be a more typical colonial form of transportation. We always think of, oh yes, the Europeans brought horses, but they also brought oxen. Oxen were more efficient in colonial America. They're also a lot smarter than horses. So initially there were many more oxen. And here's a rendering of Bergen Square, a famous one that shows you is an ox or maybe just a bull of some sort wandering around, horse-drawn wagon with hay to feed the horses and oxen, which were the transportation. And the roads are, of course, dirt, just built for wagons. Okay, this is a colonial picture. And this might be how back in colonial Journal Square, Bergen, people went down from the heights to the water, right, by horse-drawn carriage. Okay, so we exit the colonial period and we head into the 19th century. And the first major or significant change in transportation happened in Jersey City with the construction of the Morris Canal. This map is of the trail that's connected to the canal, but the canal, went all the way from the mountains of Pennsylvania down to Jersey City. But it's referred to as the Morris Canal or the Morris Essex.
What is the time? No.
Martin is shouting. Mute him. Okay. In any event, yes, canals in the early 19th century, it was Erie Canal or over in Chicago. These certainly played a major effect had an impact on urban development and were an important part of transportation for delivering goods, et cetera, to different places. Here's a 19th century photograph of the Morris Canal as it was on its way down to Jersey City. And then I have a really cool picture of the Morris Canal in Jersey City itself. The canal transit just preceded railroads. The Morris Canal, as you know, had to wind south and around the Palisades to make it to the water. They didn't really blast through the rock as they will do with the railroads, which are coming up next. Well, here's the famous Erie Cut, which was not the first, but it is one of the more famous. As we, I put this up as an introduction, but what we find is that there were 3 or maybe 4 cuts through the Palisade rocks. I'm sure Chris will be able to jump in and at the end and tell us exactly how many. But Journal Square is defined by what we call the Pennsylvania Railroad Cut. This would have been to the north of that. Farther north was the what we refer to as the Lackawanna Cut, which today is still used by New Jersey Transit for the trains to get down to Hoboken. But this is, the railroads wanted to get to a terminus by the river. And in order to do so, the most efficient way, rather than try to meander around like the canal, was to cut through the mountains, cut through the Palisade cliffs. This would define Journal Square, if not Jersey City and Hudson County, but certainly for us in Journal Square, it is a defining moment and it's based on transportation. Okay, I have some railroad dates. I wanted to get these up here so you have some sense of the timeline. You go all the way, and by the way, it's fascinating if you're interested in this to explore that there were so many different railroads. And they all had different names, then they changed their names, and they combined, and they were bought out, etc. But you have the old Patterson and Hudson River Railroad. That came in at Marion Junction way back in 1833. What's not on here is the Camden and Amboy, which was the first railroad to run across New Jersey. And that was merged into the New Jersey Railroad, which you see then in parentheses is PRR for Pennsylvania Railroad. Okay, that's what that became. Anyway, yeah, 1834 New Jersey Railroad, which 38 years later would become the Pennsylvania Railroad. Begins regular trips from Newark to Jersey City's first terminal. Now they crossed the Passaic River on the Newark or Center Street Bridge to the Hackensack River and onto Jersey City on the west side of the Palisades. It uses temporary tracks and horse-drawn trains around and over Bergen Hill. And by the way, this term Bergen Hill, over in different periods of time from the 17th right through to the 20th century, what we called, if you want to call it the Southern Palisades, or they've referred to the whole area as the Heights or as Bergen Hill. It's the high ground upon which Journal Square sits. All right, this is interesting. It was after this first railroad business, the Morris Canal was extended all the way through to Jersey City. Okay. Finally, the New Jersey Railroad gets a cut through the Palisades. So this cut, this New Jersey Railroad cut, is what today we call the Pennsylvania Railroad Cut, which is what runs under Journal Square. Okay, so I just wanted to share these with you. By the way, this whole presentation, I'll share with anyone who wants it, and you can get all of these dates that way. But I did want to give some listing of the chronology of the 19th century and the development of the railroads. I won't read it out loud. You can read it. It's interesting, the competition between these railroads and who's going to use what cut. One of the things I want to point out is that once they built these tunnels through the Palisades, and these were coal-burning steam locomotives, they were noisy and they were dirty. Right. That's that for you. Okay. Then we have this from the regarding the Bergen Tunnel, which of course is dear to us, maybe especially in JSQCA, the Bergen Arches. This was the Erie Railroad's Bergen Hill Tunnel, built between 1856 and 1861. Okay, this gave the Erie Railroad its own access. They didn't have to use New Jersey Railroad, Pennsylvania Railroad Tunnel. Okay. And yes, use of a tunnel meant use of a terminus. All along the west bank of the Hudson River were various terminals for these railroad lines. Of course, the Central was still there. There were many of them, and the Lackawanna is still there. But yeah, the Erie had its own after it built its own cut, the Bergen Hill Tunnel. Still there, of course, today. For information, you can click on this. This is really fascinating. They had cuts right through the Palisades, but they also used these elevated systems, right? Streetcar elevators to get up over the Palisades. A cool picture. I just want to point out, this is a terrible picture. Don't adjust your sets. It's messed up on this end. But the Central Railroad, can't ignore that. And this was their station over on West Side Avenue. All right, then we come into the 20th century and a development in railroads that, of course, will come to define Journal Square. And that is the construction of the Hudson Manhattan Railroad 2. This is an really early 19th century picture of the Summit Avenue station. Let me give you some information. The tubes opened in 1908. Called the Hudson Manhattan Railroad. All right, they used the Pennsylvania Railroad tracks, all right, to get down, but they built their tunnel. Of course, it was known as the tubes, as we know, was operated until 1962 when it was taken over by the Port Authority Trans-Hudson Railroad. Okay. This is a picture, typical cross-section of tunnel under river, complete and in operation. And this is one of the first tunnels under the Hudson River. The tubes. I'm going to have to ask Chris afterwards, but whether the Pennsylvania Railroad Tunnel or this one was first.
This one was first.
This one was first. Cool.
This was 1908, and the Pennsylvania's was 1910 or 1911. So they were close.
Thank you, Chris. Very good. All right, and here's the Summit Avenue station, which, you know, if you think of where Summit Avenue is today, there's nothing there now. And this would be east of the Pathside building or public service building. It was built right over the tracks, just like the present one, but east of where the plaza is now. Here's a nice picture of the station. It's old, but it's an awful lot nicer than what we have today. This was fun, I thought. These were the fares over the years. The first number is what they were then, and then adjusted for inflation. I don't have the date of when it went up to whatever it is today, but you can see how it went up. It's interesting how there was a different fare for uptown versus downtown. And this is a fascinating schematic of the tubes themselves. Double-deck caissons. Phil said, let's go back. Yeah, 30 cents. 1973, it went up to 50 cents. No, the Summit station would be on Summit. The proposed Marion station is down on the west side in the Marion section. Here's another look. So the Hudson Manhattan Railroad Station, Journal Square, Jersey City. When Journal Square got its name in the 1920s, when the Jersey Journal built its present building on the square, they changed the name of the Summit station to Journal Square. So it was the same building as the Summit station. That won't change until the construction of the boulevard in the 1920s. But they started calling it Journal Square Station when it became Journal Square. All right, here's another image of the Summit Avenue station. These tracks used by freight and passenger alike. Check out the open air platforms. All right, a lot of what I just showed you, some of the pictures I had, but a lot of this information is at this link from the Hoboken Historical Museum. So if you're interested in finding out more about the history of the tubes, go there for sure. Okay, the next evolutionary stage well, it started before the tubes actually, but you know, I cannot, let me just go back. Well, I'll say it here. We can't overstate the significance in terms of the history and development and present day character of Journal Square. We cannot overstate the role of the tubes or the path in that. I mean, when we consider today all the development that's taking place, it's for one reason. It's a transportation reason, right? It's because there is the path station there. So that development, that historical development, the opening of the tubes in 1909 is significant, to say the least. All right, but streetcars to go north and south in Hudson County and through Jersey City. And they solved the problem. One of the problems they had to solve was, yeah, working with the geography and geology, but also the railroad cuts that had been man-made. So one of what they did was they built a whole system of elevated streetcar lines, which you can see were electrified in this picture. The original ones were not electrified. They were done by a what do you call that? A conveyor system of some kind. But streetcars were all over Hudson County, and certainly Journal Square, what became a major streetcar hub. All of this prior to the advent of the automobile. Here's one line: Public Service of New Jersey, Hoboken, Jersey City, elevated. That's what you just saw in that picture. Ran from 1886 to 1949. North Hudson Railway Company, no longer with us. Taken over by Public Service. Of course, was then taken over by, well, except for their utility business, taken over by New Jersey Transit. It ceased in 1949, as did, around that time, the immediate post-war period, trolleys altogether, right, and streetcars ended. They ended because of the automobile. That's it. And because of public policy devoted to the automobile rather than to streetcars and that kind of transportation. Here's another nice shot of the elevated streetcar passing through Jersey City in Journal Square. Here's a close-up of a typical public service streetcar. They were a vital part of transportation in Jersey City. I have some interesting oral history from people who lived in Jersey City and Union City in the pre-war period, and you could hop on and off a streetcar, come down to Journal Square. There were more of these than there were buses, and they were the way to get around. Another old picture of a streetcar. This one's electric. Here's a cool map of the that same company, North Hudson County Railway. You can see the extent of their coverage throughout Hudson County. And you can see here's the Pennsylvania Railroad ferry terminal, which was right at the tip of Exchange Place. Then here's the Erie over here at the base of Pavonia Avenue. Here's the Lackawanna, Hoboken. And there was a West Shore Railroad terminus in Weehawken. And of course, Central Railroad would be farther south. So these elevated streetcars, and if you look at the routes they took, these would be Newark Avenue, all to get up over the cliffs, the heights, onto the high ground. Okay. Here's a streetcar. I love this shot because here's the Public Service logo up here. Here's the Public Service building. Later coming known to, as it is to us today, as the Pathside building. And here's a trolley, a streetcar pulling into where buses pull in today. But it also shows you that, yes, because of the path, and then because of the Public Service depot here, station, Journal Square was a hub, transportation hub. And it's important for us to know, though, that too, but in the middle of the 20th century, Journal Square was a destination also for people. I know that I've said, oh, well, it's, all these railroad lines cut through underneath, etc. But it was a destination because of the activity around the square, the theaters, the 3 grand theaters, the restaurants, etc. Journal Square was a place to hang out. And you'd get there by trolley and bus by the middle of the 20th century too. But you didn't really drive yet. But soon you would. You start to see the cars parked here in this probably, mid-20s, around the war. Looks like it's around the war. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. All right, well, here it comes. We've already seen a couple pictures, but I thought I'd, yeah, It's a great idea, man. The Model T, of course, but the automobile will change everything for Journal Square. Yes, there's an overlap, so the railroad, streetcars, etc., are there, but it's really the advent of the automobile and the public policy associated with it that leads to the death of the railroads, right? And that leads to the decline of Journal Square. If you ask, historically that, oh yeah, Journal Square had that really bad period in the 1970s, etc. Well, so much of that was due to the death of the railroads, getting rid of the streetcars, all the attending industries, etc. Entertainment went, and the focus was on making it automobile friendly. With the construction of the PATH terminal in the 1970s, the idea was, well, you drive there from somewhere else, park, and get on the PATH. You wouldn't take a bus, as of course people still took buses, but that was the thinking. Hey, let's build a giant parking place so people can drive into Journal Square and get on the PATH. So the automobile will change everything. In order for that to happen, this is an old picture of the original steel bridge, I believe, over the Pennsylvania Railroad cut that separates Journal Square from what today we call the Heights. And the decision to build a new boulevard bridge, let me get to that. Here you see the picture of it. I love this shot. This is an aerial shot somehow taken maybe from an airship. I don't know, because it's got to be, of course, after 1929, because this is a brand new boulevard bridge, and the Lowe's is here, of course. Right, but one of the things that this shows us, if you look at the way that the railroad cut goes, is that really all that we call Journal Square today, this whole area, is really just one big platform over railroad tracks. Right? It's all underneath there. This is a good depiction of that. Anyway, this boulevard bridge, same one that's there today, was a massive public works undertaking. And of course, it was, well, I want to show you something here. Here's a quote from 1895 from, well, it's NJ.com, it was the Jersey Journal. $2 million. So that was in 1895, and then it was 30 years in the making. But the interesting thing is, the quote is continued, conceived primarily as a plaisance, or pleasure drive. The twists and turns of the boulevard assumed a leisurely pace of travel. Scenic views were purposely incorporated into the aesthetics of the roadway's design. No commercial traffic would be permitted to ride along the boulevard, which was intended only for pedestrians, bicycles, horseback riding, and horse-drawn carriages. What happened? Something happened, right? But that's not as it is today. But that was the original intention. Of course, there weren't automobiles when this was written or published, or at least not any that people owned. But it's fascinating. It's also fascinating that was the thinking. Let's build a boulevard that is a pleasure drive. And here it is. The handsome, broad, high bridge over the Pennsylvania Railroad is a link in the Hudson Boulevard that extends the entire length of Hudson County. Looks like it even still has bunting from the opening all over the place. But it makes it so that now, how do you get to Journal Square? You take some kind of automobile transportation. Here's another picture of the newly constructed Boulevard Bridge over the railroad cut. There it is being built. This is a cool picture. And here's a rendering of how it looked again upon completion. There's the Stanley, if you can barely make that out. So this would be looking north. Begin to see the congestion of various kinds of automobile traffic. It's a labor bank building. Okay, why is this automobile here? Does anybody want to try in the chat room? Who did this belong to? It's a Cadillac, by the way. Yes, 10 points to Bill Hague, to Bill Armours there. He nailed it. Frank Hague, yes. And of course, yeah, he had a car like this, and he decided to, through his spending of public funds, to reshape Journal Square as we know it today to accommodate automobiles. And there's some interesting pictures here. Some of these are rendering. Oh, okay, there you see Journal Square, February 1929. No streetcars, just cars and buses. Of course, the Holland Tunnel, part of the automobile revolution, if you will, devolution. Great shot. But yeah, look at some of these pictures. I don't have a date on this, but we know it's after the Lowe's was built. There's that cool miniature golf course still there, right on Journal Square. And we see cars and buses, but the whole thing is now starting to look like it's laid out for the automobile. You don't see any electric wires for streetcars anymore, or anything else. No tracks in the road. It's now become an automobile square. And again, here's Bergen Square. Same thing. Where are the electric trolley lines? Where are the tracks? They're all gone now. Plenty of room for cars. They're even double parked back then. How about that? And again, same thing. So it happened pretty quickly. But one thing we might even ask, if we go back to a picture, like I wish I had a date on this one. I wouldn't be surprised if at the time that this was rendered, photographed, glossed over, whatever, that there still were trolley tracks around. But then it might have even been the thought that, well, if we're going to show Journal Square, let's get rid of those ugly tracks and just make it seem like it's a beautiful place for automobiles. Because that's the value system that would change. Likewise. And again, all from around the same period. We see the State Theater is still there. They're all wide open for auto traffic. Indeed. Some traffic signs. Anyway, move on here. Even the Apple Tree House. This looks like it's in the 1960s, pictured with cars. I had to throw that in there. It's a nice picture of the Apple Tree House. Still in good shape before it went into disrepair. So here's what we have today and what we know well. And again, And so the mixture, and this is, relatively recent to obviously not so recent because the other Journal Square One tower isn't there, but there's the Transportation Center, completed and opened officially in 1975. It's the pass station. So we have today, it's this mixture of, yes, Journal Square is still defined because it's the pass station in so many ways, but it is also designed now, and we're all too familiar that there's some conflict, but over what is the future with regard to the 20th century decision to prioritize the automobile, which is still, a primary form of transportation. And there's the plaza, which again completed in 1975, knowing that this way to get into Manhattan is what would define Journal Square for decades to come. The future. So things to think about, things to discuss. We now have bike paths sprouting up all over. Is the new transportation history of Journal Square going to be more defined by bikes and pedestrians? Or look at some of these cool things, electric conveyances of the future. Maybe this might even be like electromagneto or something. Here's another super modern electric streetcar. Not unlike maybe our light rail, but of course much newer. Or this. Direction will we go? The future is ours. So, transportation, what form it takes and how it is utilized will define the future of Journal Square, because we just saw that it did in the past. So what do you think? Where will it go? Close with that man walking in the woods. Maybe we'll revert all the way back to where we started. By reforested Journal Square. All right, I've gone on too long. I just want to thank Chris Lamb for wonderful resources to help me put this together. The Hoboken Museum for their resources. Jersey Journal, of course. Lynn Hazan of, otherwise known as Chickpea, who interviewed me for a piece 4 years ago now. And when she put that piece together, she had all kinds of great photographs. And also all the good folks who keep posting wonderful vintage Jersey City pictures on social media, which I keep downloading and putting into presentations for me to share with you. All right, that concludes it. Thank you, guys. Hope everyone can unmute themselves. So, questions, comments, maybe.
James, since I have to.
Yeah, please, Bill.
First of all, very informative presentation. Just a few comments. First of all, you said cities grew up along rivers. It's actually seaport, the seaports, the ocean ports. New York as a natural, New York Harbor as a natural inlet. Other great seaports like Hong Kong, I guess Rotterdam as well. Just New Orleans in this country. But secondly, the path, my father at age 15 and a half, he was living in Brooklyn and his father became ill. My father had to go to work. He lied about his age, got a job with the National Cash Register Company, took the subway and then the H&M tubes over to the Summit Station, and he worked for the National Cash Register Company, which had an office on Summit Avenue, so it was probably only a few blocks from the what we now know as the Journal Square Path Station. Bus service used to be better. I know when I started at St. Peter's College in 1967, I could take the 122 bus directly from Bergenfield in Bergen County, where I lived, into Jersey City. I'm not sure when that stopped running, but
Bill, who operated the bus lines back then?
public service.
And weren't there private companies too?
Yeah, there was.
Public service is a public, private.
Yeah, public service is private. Yeah.
But yes, public service, but, and Red and Tan, those were the two
Oh,
companies.
yeah.
In Bergenfield at least. But it was a very informative presentation. I liked it. And, you know, I just feel so sad, I guess we all do, about the demise of streetcars and, you know, all to make way for the automobile. That's all I have to say for now.
All right, thanks, Bill.
James, it's Michael. Great,
Yes, Michael.
great presentation. Interesting. You showed the incline, the one picture of the early incline. Cincinnati and Pittsburgh,
Oh, yeah.
two river cities with higher hills than the Palisades. But each of those cities had up 15 or more inclines back in those days as a way of getting on from down below to get up into the hills. Pittsburgh still has saved a couple of them, but there was a way to get from the one place to the other in those days.
That's so true. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, there were, sorry, I didn't catch all of that, but on the subject of inclines, there were several in Hudson County, right? There was one at Kings Bluff in Weehawken. I have an amazing picture of it. It's actually, well, it wasn't even an incline. It's the craziest thing. It's like an elevator and then just like a long horizontal trestle to the top. And it used to take people to the, I forget what the name of it, the racetrack that was up there. And also, right, there were several inclines, I think, around Hoboken, right? And Union City, like, around those heights. But yeah, I've never, I would love for somebody to put together like a resource on just all the sort of crossings, like from below the hill, to the top of the hill or top of the Palisades. Really.
No, it just says,
Let me throw in some personal anecdotes. About 2 years ago, Lauren and I went down to Pittsburgh because our nephew was graduating there, and we got to ride some of the inclines that they still have them running.
trolleys.
Yeah, they're called incline trolleys. They get pulled, up at about seems like a 50-degree angle or something up the hill. I think 3 of them left. Michael, I'm not sure.
There are 2 left. There are 2 left.
And also my first job back in 1967, I took the tubes from Jersey City into New York, the opposite of Bill's dad, I guess.
But
I would take the bus from Newark to I guess Newark Penn Station, and then the tubes, which mostly at that point it was owned by the pass station, but it still said Hudson Tubes all over the place.
But those trolleys, they were run by conveyor belts.
Yeah.
I think those trolleys,
The
I
inclines.
believe, were run by conveyor.
By
Because-
cables. Yeah.
By cable, yeah. Because one would have to go up as the other came down.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Johnstown, Pennsylvania still has an incline that carries cars up the hill to their residential neighborhood.
Of course, Hong Kong is very famous for its inclines as well.
I'll throw in a personal anecdote. When I was a boy, we were going to we used to go into I grew up in Bergen County. We used to go into Queens to go see the Mets play at Shea Stadium. At one time, and my father would take me, and my father was a big railroad buff. At one time we were going, we used to just drive, but he said, oh, we have to go this way because they just opened up a brand new great station in Jersey City called the Journal Square Pass Station. So we drove down to the Journal Square, parked in the Pass Plaza, and took the path into New York and took the subway out to Shea. But he was like excited to see this new station, which today is, what it is. That's my anecdote.
So one thing I wanted to just mention was, when the Hudson Manhattan was being developed, its primary goal was really connecting all the different railroad terminals in Newark and along the Hudson waterfront. So James, as you were talking about how all the different railroads had their termini on the waterfront, because the Hudson River was a barrier. Prior to the H&M, there was no tunnel. So if you were taking a train from Chicago to New York, you took a train from Chicago to Jersey City or Hoboken, and you got on a ferry and went across. But all the H&M stations were at the different terminating railroads terminals. And even today, if you go into the Pavonia Newport Path Station, the columns have the E on the top of the column. That's for the Erie Railroad, because that was their terminal. And I think initially they were even, or maybe at some point after they opened, they were looking at connecting to the Central Railroad. So there would have been a station in what's now Liberty State Park, where the Central Railroad terminal was.
And so Exchange Place was Pennsylvania, and Hoboken was Lackawanna.
That's right.
Yeah, the Central is in the original plans, or at least I think I saw I think it was a shareholder report from 1909 that mentioned it, and also mentioned connecting up to Grand Central. That was kind of their dream. But I think as far as that use case, it turned out to be a bad investment for them, because not long after they opened the North River tunnels, right? Like the tunnels into Penn Station, and it sort of obviated the need for, at least for the Pennsylvania Railroad customers.
For the Pennsylvania,
right, to take the
and they drew down a lot of their service to Exchange Place after that tunnel opened.
It was also the largest office building in the world, is what I've read. Hudson Terminal building.
It is.
Sorry, I thought you were going to mention Hudson Terminal next.
Yeah,
Sorry, my audio is a little bit bad. I should just leave you guys to the conversation.
No, it's good. I held up a picture earlier when James was talking about the Hudson. Yeah, here we go. I don't know if y'all can see that, but that's the old Pennsylvania terminal at Exchange Place. This was back in the 1880s. But this is from Railroads of Hoboken and Jersey City, which has a lot of photos. And a lot of these you can find in the New Jersey room also. They're kind of organized by railroad here. So there's a chapter on each of the railroads and all their facilities here. But I was going to say, so, these railroads were moving not just passengers, but also freight. And they would actually move the freight cars onto barges that had tracks on them and float them across the river, and then reconsist the train in Manhattan or in Brooklyn or wherever it was landing. And there's still one of those in operation today. The Port Authority took it over back in 2006, I want to say. And they run it as the New York, New Jersey Rail. But Conrail brings freight trains to Greenville Yard here in Jersey City, and they move the cars onto a barge, float them over to the 65th Street terminal in Brooklyn, in Bay Ridge, rebuild the trains go out to Long Island. So that's the last one of those operations that's still going here in New York Harbor.
So that Conrail line that's in operation that cuts through by Newark Avenue and down here by Liberty State Park, that ends up there?
That does connect there. Most of the traffic that goes to the float comes from the west. So it goes through Oak Island Yard in Newark and crosses the Newark Bay Bridge and comes in that way. And I'd say Norfolk Southern is the originating railroad for a lot of that stuff. So it would be coming from Pennsylvania or from points south, but coming in through Oak Island Yard in Newark and then into Greenville.
Now, Chris, another question for you that I was talking, I remembered. There are 4 cuts through the Palisades here, right? but I can only think of three.
There's the Bergen Hill Cut, which is
That's-
where the light rail goes now, over West Side Avenue, MLK Drive.
Ah, okay.
That was the Central Railroad. That was their route. So that's there, and then we have the Pennsylvania here on the path. The Erie Cut, which is the Bergen Arches. There is the Long Dock Tunnel, which you mentioned is still there. It's also still in operation as a freight route.
Lackawanna.
Yeah. It's Conrail shared asset territory now. But you see a lot of all the trains that you mentioned over here by Nork Avenue and the Waldo Tunnel. They're then going through the Long Dock Tunnel and going up CSX's water route and over to Buffalo or up the Suzie Q up into southern tier of New York. Yeah, and then the tunnel that NJ Transit uses to get to Hoboken Terminal. Yeah, and then Weehawken, as Sonia mentioned. There's the one that the light rail, the Hudson Bergen Light Rail uses today to get over to Bergen Line Avenue and Tunnelly Avenue.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, thank you all for listening. And there was that important correction earlier. Got to give that third slide was Varanasi on the Ganges, not New Delhi. Okay.
And I'd say if anyone's interested in the transition from streetcars to buses, there is a famous, it's referred to as the GM conspiracy, and there are some documentaries about it, about how GM and other auto companies and tire companies were putting people onto the boards of transit agencies across the country to get them to ditch the streetcar and transition to buses. So.
Yeah.
There was a famous movie, something with Rabbit, that included both cartoons and real live actors that touched on the LA version of that story.
They
Yeah,
did
Who
it
Framed
over the
Roger
country.
Rabbit.
Right, and that involved Goodyear, the tire companies too.
I've heard that, I don't know, like Wikipedia at least is pretty skeptical about that theory, because it mentions how, like you saw the same disinvestment in the trolley systems in a lot of other countries, and a lot of systems that weren't controlled by GM also saw that disinvestment. I mean, like what I've read is that it was the just being stuck in traffic behind all these cars made the trolleys just a lot slower. And there was like a death spiral of service, lower, service cuts and lower ridership that led to their demise. But I'm sure there's differences.
Question about all the pictures you put up, James, that last one.
I've got to leave. Good night, everyone.
Good night, Michael. Thank you.
Was that Minneapolis?
I have to hold on. Maybe if I go,
It was Minneapolis.
it was. Thank you. For some reason, when I put it's just my lack of proficiency with the latest version of PowerPoint. But if I put a note on the slide, right underneath the slide, then it's not visible to me during the presentation. I have all my identifying information in those notes. Some written down, but that's some there.
But that shot of Minneapolis was interesting because, of course, the river that bridge is going over is the Mississippi, right?
Yes.
And that was so central that the transportation, to the whole story of the United States as a country, and New Orleans.
Absolutely, and unless they dug that Chicago River Canal, Chicago never would have been connected to the Mississippi. All right, everybody. Well, I'm gonna I'll post the recording of this on Facebook, et cetera, but also I will circulate via the History Committee email the PowerPoint presentation, so you can all, have it for yourself. And there are parts in there that are clickable, and you can just go to the resources also. All right. But thank you for your contributions, and
Thank you.
Thank you.
yeah, we'll have another one soon. We haven't determined March yet, but just so you know, April is going to be Jerome Choice and the African American burial ground here at Johnston and Maple.
Cool.
Okay.
James, do you mind if I ask you just a question about, so I posted a link, as something I came across, and I was wondering if you knew anything about it, which is like this Waldo Tunnel, like how the tunnel for the National Docks was built. Do you
Yes,
know about that history?
Chris had shared that with me,
Oh,
and I went through that, and I stole some things from that for this presentation, I think.
Oh, wonderful. Cool. So you're posting the slides?
Yeah, I'll share them.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the presentation, but thank you
Very
so
good.
much for this. All right.
All right, everybody. Have a great night. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.